just got promoted. And before you even let yourself feel it, you were already rehearsing the speech, the one that explains why you deserved it, the one nobody asked for. You canceled something last week. You spent more time crafting the excuse than it took to make the call. You made a decision about your life, your work, your money, your future, and felt that familiar pressure rise in your chest, that pull, that compulsive need to explain, to justify, to make sure everyone around you understands and approves. Here's what no one ever warned you about. That pull is not consideration for others. It's not humility. It's not even politeness. It is a leak, a slow, invisible drain on your power, your confidence, and in some cases, on the entire shape of your life. Today, we're going deep into 10 Stoic lessons. Not soft, not surface level, not the kind of advice that tells you to just be more confident. These are raw, liberating principles that will change how you speak, how you decide, and how you carry yourself in the world. All 10 of them. And here's my promise to you. By the time we reach lesson 10, something you've been hauling around since childhood is going to feel different. Something is going to get lighter. Stay with me, because lesson 1 tears down the entire invisible system you've been operating inside. Welcome to Stoic Sight, where we pursue the philosophy of self-mastery, personal power, and intentional living. If you're new here, subscribe now and hit the notification bell. We go this deep every single week. Lesson 1. The contract you never signed. When exactly did you agree to this arrangement? Or when did you sit down, consciously, deliberately, and decide that your choices need to be approved, validated, or understood by the people around you before they count as real? You didn't. No one does. But most of us are living as though we did. We move through the world carrying an invisible contract, one we never signed, that states every decision must be explained, every direction justified, every choice defended, until some imaginary jury renders its verdict. And the most disorienting part? You wrote that contract yourself. Somewhere between childhood and adulthood, your mind absorbed a belief that your choices only become fully valid once external voices confirm them. Where did that come from? Maybe parents who questioned everything you did, a school system that graded not just your answers, but your capacity to defend them, to relationships where your judgment was treated as suspect until proven otherwise. In all of that, explanation became armor. If I can justify it clearly enough, they won't dismiss me. If I can make them understand, I'll be safe from their rejection. If I can build the right case, their approval will follow. But here's what that armor actually does over decades. It doesn't protect you. It replaces you. It trains your brain to look outward for permission before it will trust anything inside. And slowly, without any single dramatic moment, you stop being the authority on your own life. Marcus Aurelius wrote that a person holds dominion over their own mind and nowhere else, not over how others interpret your choices, not over whether they agree, not over what they decide your decisions mean about you, your mind, your inner world. That is the only territory you were ever actually meant to govern. Every time you over-explain, you vacate that territory. You walk out of the room and leave the door open. You hand the keys to someone who has no business being inside. The Stoics named the inner command center the hegemonikon, the ruling faculty, the seat of all judgment and will. Their entire philosophy was a fortress constructed around it, not to isolate it, not to wall the world out, but to ensure that nothing from outside could destabilize what lived within. The moment you stop over-explaining is the moment you begin rebuilding that fortress. Not because you're arrogant, not because other people's perspectives don't matter, but because the life you are living is yours, and you are the only person who must actually inhabit what you decide. But write this down right now. My decisions belong to me. No court required. Lesson 2. Over-explaining is not a habit, it's a wound. I need you to hear this carefully because it is possibly the most important thing in this entire video. Over-explaining is not a communication style. It is not thoroughness. It is not a sign of care or intelligence, even though many of us tell ourselves that it is. In most cases, over-explaining is a wound that has been dressed up and passed off as a personality trait. Before you move past that, understand that trauma does not exclusively mean a single catastrophic event. Trauma is any repeated experience that trained your nervous system to believe that simply existing without justification wasn't safe. You grew up in a home where feelings were met with logic instead of warmth, so you learned to construct a legal argument for your emotions before you dared express them. You had a parent or a teacher or a system whose approval was always conditional, so you internalized the belief that your judgment needed external validation to be trustworthy. You were in a relationship, romantic, professional, or otherwise, where your perspective was consistently undermined or dismissed, so you developed preemptive explanation as a defensive reflex. Old patterns don't break until you understand what they were protecting you from. Here's what this wound looks like in daily practice. You send a message and immediately fire off 3 more to clarify what you meant before anyone has even responded. You make a decision, and before anyone challenges it, you've already preloaded the defense. You say no to something and then spend the next 15 minutes narrating the reasonableness of your no. And here's the one that almost nobody identifies. When someone compliments your work and you immediately begin listing the reasons, it wasn't actually that impressive. That's over-explaining too. You are making others comfortable with your success by dismantling it before they can react. You're managing their response before they've even had one. Epictetus, a man born into slavery who became one of the ancient world's most powerful philosophical voices, said, "Wish for what happens to be exactly as it is, and you will find life flowing through you without resistance." When you over-explain, you are fighting the current. You are trying to reshape reality into a version where everyone understands, everyone approves, everyone grants permission. But reality does not negotiate. People will misjudge you. People will question you. People will draw the wrong conclusions. The Stoic response is not to explain harder. It is to accept that judgment exists and stop allowing the fear of it to command your behavior. Here's a simple practice to begin. For the next 48 hours, don't stop the urge to over-explain. Just notice it. Observe it without judgment. And when you feel it rising, ask yourself one honest question. Am I saying this to serve the conversation? Or am I saying this to outrun my own fear of being misunderstood? That question, asked with complete honesty, is where the shift begins. Say this aloud wherever you're sitting right now. The old pattern ends with me. I choose differently starting now. Lesson 3. More words, less trust. Here is a psychological paradox that most people spend their entire lives never encountering. The more you justify something, the less believable it becomes. There is a well-documented phenomenon in behavioral science, the over-justification effect, and what it reveals is completely counterintuitive. When you pile justification onto a statement, the other person's brain doesn't become more convinced. It becomes more suspicious, not always consciously, not always in a way they could articulate, but somewhere in the instinctive pattern-reading parts of human cognition, this equation fires. If this requires this much defense, something about it needs defending. So think about the last time someone worked very hard to convince you of something. A salesperson, a politician, a friend with an agenda. The harder they pushed, the more you pulled back. The more reasons they offered, the more reasons you found not to believe them. Psychologists call this reactance. the brain's natural resistance to being persuaded by excessive force. Picture two candidates answering the same interview question. Why did you leave your last position? The first person says, well, it was several things, really. The management style wasn't aligned with my values, and there were communication challenges, and I felt my skills weren't being fully developed, and the commute had become very difficult, and honestly, the culture just wasn't quite right. The second person says, I had learned everything that position could teach me. It was time for a bigger challenge. Who do you believe? The second person, every single time. Not because their answer is more truthful. Perhaps every word the first person said was accurate, but the second communicates something the first one cannot. Certainty, groundedness, a quiet, unshakable trust in their own story. Marcus Aurelius wrote that nothing is worth gaining if it costs you your self-respect or your integrity. Self-respect in communication looks like economy. It looks like trusting that your words carry weight without needing them buried under an avalanche of qualification. Every additional word you pile onto a statement out of fear is a quiet act of self-betrayal. It announces to the room, I'm not sure my own voice is enough. The distinction isn't between speaking and staying silent. It's between speaking from fullness and speaking from fear. From fullness sounds like, here's what I've decided, and here's why it matters to me. From fear sounds like, here's what I've decided, but let me offer you 14 reasons before you form a judgment. The distance between those two is the distance between confidence and its imitation. Write this where you'll see it tomorrow. Fewer words, more weight. Lesson 4. The people demanding explanations are showing you something. Think carefully about the last time you felt that pressure, that urgent, almost physical need to justify a choice you'd made. Now think about who you were justifying it to. In most cases, it isn't strangers. It's the people who are supposed to be closest to you, a partner, a parent, a longtime friend. And embedded in that observation is a deeply uncomfortable truth. When you consistently feel you must over-explain yourself to someone who is supposed to love you unconditionally, that relationship carries a deficit, a trust deficit. And once you see that clearly, it changes everything. Real trust doesn't require constant proof. Think about the one relationship in your life where you feel genuinely safe. The person you'd call at 2 a.m. with no preparation, no performance, no rehearsal. Do you over-explain to them? Almost certainly not. You say what you need. They receive it. There's a shared foundation of goodwill that makes endless justification unnecessary. Now consider the relationships where explanation feels compulsory. What's missing in those? In most cases, one of 3 things is absent: a history of your judgment being trusted rather than scrutinized, love that feels given rather than earned through continual performance, or a power structure in which the less powerful person feels perpetually required to justify their right to decide. Seneca wrote, "Stay close to those who lift you, and be willing to lift those you can, because teaching and learning are never truly separate." The Stoics were deeply intentional about who they kept close, not from social elitism, but from the understanding that the people you spend the most time with become the internal voices you carry even in solitude. If those voices demand constant proof, you will eventually begin demanding it of yourself. You will cross-examine your own decisions before anyone else gets the opportunity. Now build relationships where your decisions are received with trust, not interrogation. Here's something to reflect on. Take your 5 closest relationships, and for each one, ask honestly, when I share a decision with this person, what do I expect first? Acceptance or challenge? If your answer is challenge, that relationship deserves a deeper look. Not necessarily severing, but understanding which connections require emotional preparation before you enter them, and why. You can hold deep love for someone and simultaneously acknowledge that they do not create the safety necessary for you to be fully yourself. Both things can be true, and recognizing that truth is not betrayal, it's clarity. Write this down. Trust is something given. Evidence is not its price. Lesson 5. Silence is a form of strength. Most people are terrified of silence. The moment a conversation pauses, the moment a question lingers without an immediate answer, most people rush to fill the gap. And in that rush, they over-explain. They ramble. They offer context no one requested. They say things they immediately regret, all because 3 seconds of stillness felt like a verdict. Here's what psychology reveals about silence. It creates space. And in human communication, space is where meaning actually lives. When you speak without pause, stacking words on top of words, without breath between them, your language has nowhere to land. Nothing fully registers. The listener is overwhelmed, not convinced. But when you speak and then allow silence, deliberately, not anxiously, your words carry gravity, authority. They signal, these were chosen. They were worth the wait. Imagine 2 responses in a high-stakes interview to the question, why should we choose you? The first response is immediate. A rapid sequence of qualities, credentials, and enthusiasm stacked so tightly that nothing stands out. The second response begins with 3 full seconds of deliberate stillness. Then, because I have done this exact role before, and in my last position, I produced results that exceeded the target by 30%. Then silence again. Which person is still in the room when the decision gets made? The pause doesn't communicate hesitation. It communicates command. It says, I am not afraid of this moment. I do not need to fill every second of this conversation with noise to prove my worth. My sense of self is not contingent on how quickly I respond. Marcus Aurelius wrote that a truly grounded person can receive evidence that they're wrong and respond with genuine openness, because their identity is not tied to being right. That is intellectual security, and it's the same quality that allows someone to sit inside silence without scrambling to escape it. Here's the practice. Before any high-stakes response, a difficult conversation with a partner, a challenge in a meeting, a provocative question from someone attempting to destabilize you, pause for 3 full seconds, not nervously, not with visible discomfort, deliberately. Take 1 breath, hold the other person's gaze, then speak. This accomplishes 3 things simultaneously. It gives your brain time to select precise language rather than defaulting to verbal panic. It signals that you are responding from choice rather than reflex, and it naturally prevents the avalanche of over-explanation, because when you choose your words deliberately, you choose fewer of them, and when you say less, you say infinitely more. Remember, my silence carries more authority than their noise. Lesson 6. Stop defending. Start absorbing. You've lived this scene. Someone challenges you, maybe fairly, maybe not, maybe somewhere uncomfortably in between. And before they've finished the sentence, you're already building the rebuttal. Your pulse is elevated. Your thoughts are racing through evidence and counter-arguments. You are no longer listening. You are waiting for the moment you can explain yourself. This is called defensive reactivity, and it quietly destroys the very confidence and credibility you're trying to defend. When you immediately mount a defense in response to criticism, you communicate multiple things, none of which serve you. You signal that you feel threatened, which often tells the other person they've struck something real. You demonstrate that being right matters more to you than understanding what actually happened. And you hand that person enormous leverage over your emotional state by letting their words determine your reaction. So what do you do instead? When criticism arrives, whether deserved or not, instead of defending, You absorb. You say, "That's interesting. Can you say more about what you mean?" Or, "I hear you. Let me actually sit with that." Or, most powerfully, simply, "Okay," not "okay" as agreement. I okay as a demonstration that you are a person who can receive information without fracturing. This feels like it goes against every instinct, because it does. Every part of your nervous system is demanding you defend yourself. But here's what happens when you absorb instead. The energy of the confrontation immediately shifts. The other person was braced for pushback. They leaned forward for resistance. When you don't give it to them, the conflict has nowhere to go, and something else becomes possible. You can actually hear the criticism. You give yourself the space to determine whether it has merit. Enormous amounts of legitimate feedback, the kind that could genuinely change things, gets discarded every year because people were too busy defending themselves to actually receive it. Epictetus said, "If someone tells you you're false, consider that they may not know your full inventory, and then offer them quiet gratitude for what they did notice." The Stoic posture toward criticism isn't defense. It isn't collapse. It's perspective, the unshakable understanding that your worth exists independently of anyone's assessment of it, which means their criticism carries no existential threat. You can examine it calmly, extract what is genuinely useful, and release whatever isn't. That is the real power, not the power to win arguments, the power to not need to. Before your next difficult conversation, say this: I don't defend. I don't collapse. I stand. Lesson 7. The ACE Framework. How to communicate without over-explaining. By now you understand the why. Here's the how, because the practical question deserves a direct answer. If you want to stop over-explaining, what do you actually say? Here is a framework that is simple, memorable, and immediately applicable. I call it the ACE Framework. 3 parts, 3 letters. A stands for assertion, C stands for context, E stands for end. Most over-explanation happens because people lead with context, all the backstory, all the contributing circumstances, all the reasons, and either never arrive at an actual point or arrive at it so buried that it carries no weight. The ACE Framework reverses that entirely. First, assert. State your decision, your answer, your position, plainly, first, without preamble. Not, "Well, I've been thinking about this for quite some time, and there are several factors, and after really weighing everything, I thought maybe I should probably consider not attending." Just, "I won't be there." Begin there. Full stop. Second, context, but minimal. If context genuinely adds something to the exchange, offer it. 1 reason, 1 sentence, at most 2, not a paragraph, not a list of contributing factors. "I have another commitment that evening." Done. Third, end, stop. Do not append qualifiers. Do not apologize. Do not trail into another cycle of justification. The sequence is assertion, minimal context, silence. That's the entire pattern. Someone asks why you walked away from a long-term situation. Old response: "It's complicated. There were communication challenges. We had different visions, but I still care about them, and neither of us was really to blame. The timing simply wasn't aligned." AC response: "It wasn't the right fit for either of us. If pressed, we were moving in different directions." End. Seneca wrote that your instincts know what they're talking about. Trust them. That is precisely what the ACE Framework protects. Your original, unfiltered knowing. Every layer of over-explanation you stack atop a decision buries that knowing under imagined reactions. ACE keeps it visible, audible, sovereign. And here's the long-term effect of using this consistently. You begin to make better decisions, because when you know you'll need to stand behind a choice in 1 clear sentence, you stop making choices you can't actually defend. You begin choosing things you genuinely believe in, things you can assert without flinching. Before your next difficult conversation, I say it, I mean it, I stop. Lesson 8. There is a difference between explaining and communicating. Let me be completely explicit here, because this conversation could be misread. Nothing in these lessons is an argument for emotional withdrawal. This is not a case for stonewalling those you love, for being dismissive in professional environments, or for building a life in which no one ever genuinely sees you. The distinction being drawn is not between explaining and not explaining. The distinction is between communication that comes from security and communication that comes from fear. There are moments when explaining yourself is not merely appropriate. It is essential. When your decision directly affects someone with a genuine stake in the outcome, they deserve honest clarity. Not your approval seeking, but real information conveyed with care. When you've made an error in a professional context, addressing it directly and outlining how you're correcting it isn't weakness, it's integrity. When you're teaching or mentoring, thorough explanation is the job itself. When intimacy is being deepened in a relationship of trust, sharing your inner world, your doubts, your reasoning, your changes of mind, isn't over-explaining. That's connection. And when you've genuinely hurt someone, a real explanation followed by accountability is not diminishment, it's character. So here's the filter. In any moment where you're uncertain whether to explain, ask one question. Is this for them, for the relationship, for genuine understanding between us? Or is it for me, so I feel safer from the possibility of judgment? If it's the first, communicate openly, richly, with all the warmth and detail the moment calls for. If it's the last, that's the pattern we're working to outgrow. Marcus Aurelius didn't tell us to stop speaking. He told us to stop wasting time performing what goodness looks like, and instead, simply be it. The Stoics had deep friendships, profound commitments, and fierce loyalty. What they refused was letting anxiety pilot their speech. They communicated from virtue, from genuine care, genuine accountability, genuine presence, not from the relentless need to manage perception. Not less communication, better communication. Every word chosen, not wrung out by fear. From this point forward, I speak by choice, never by fear. Lesson 9. Your identity is not subject to public review. I want you to sit with a question. Who are you when there is no audience? Not who you perform, not who you explain. Not the version of you that exists inside someone else's understanding. Who are you before the justifications, before the rehearsals, before the approval seeking began? That person, the one who existed before all of that conditioning, is who this lesson returns to. There's a concept in social psychology called the looking glass self, the idea that our self-image is largely constructed from how we interpret others seeing us. We look at ourselves not directly, but through the reflection we believe exists in other people's eyes. And over time, for many of us, the reflection has grown more real than the reality. We start making choices based on how they'll appear. We explain endlessly because we've quietly outsourced our identity to external consensus. And what that does over years is this: you lose yourself. Not dramatically, not in a single moment, one small retreat at a time. Each time you over-explain, each time you compress your truth to fit someone else's comfort, each time you wait for a verdict before you act. Epictetus taught radical non-attachment, the understanding that what you think you possess was never truly yours to grip. Apply that teaching here. Your identity doesn't belong to other people's interpretation of you. It never did. Every time you over-explain to control someone's perception, you are protecting something that was never actually at risk. Your real self cannot be taken by a misreading. It can only be abandoned by you. So start practicing small, unexplained choices. Order what you genuinely want without narrating the decision to the table. You leave a gathering when it's the right time for you to leave, without the extended exit performance. Say no without a story attached to it. Decline without an explanation that fills the silence. This isn't unkindness. This isn't selfishness. You are simply no longer performing your choices for an audience that was never the point. And over time, something quiet and remarkable occurs. You begin to hear yourself again. Beneath the noise of imagined voices and preloaded judgments, your own thoughts surface. You find yourself still there, intact, whole, yours. Say this: I know who I am. That has always been enough. Lesson 10. The life waiting on the other side. Everything we've covered, every lesson, every reframe, every shift in perspective has been moving toward this, because stopping the over-explanation isn't the destination. It's the door. When you stop spending your energy on justifying, defending, and performing approval, when you reclaim all the mental and emotional bandwidth that has been held hostage by others' opinions for years, here is what that energy becomes available for. Your creativity expands. Most people never fully realize how much creative energy is consumed by approval seeking. Every idea you killed before it was born because you were already imagining the criticism. Every project you didn't start because you couldn't pre-defend it. Every impulse you silenced because it hadn't been pre-approved. When you stop explaining and start creating, unfiltered, undefended, fully yours, you access a level of output that most people never reach because they spent their energy managing reactions instead of producing work. Do your relationships transform? When you stop performing for acceptance, you become something genuinely magnetic, authentic. The connections built from real confidence, not from the careful performance of acceptability, run deeper, last longer, and offer more than anything built on the foundation of approval seeking ever could. Authenticity draws people of similar quality. Performance draws an audience. Know which one you want. Your decision-making sharpens. When you are no longer factoring every possible reaction into every choice you make, you can finally hear yourself clearly. You stop deciding by imagined consensus and start deciding by genuine conviction. And decisions made from that place, aligned with your actual values, your real goals, your true nature, tend to be the ones that hold, the ones you never regret. And most profoundly, you develop dignity, not pride. Pride measures itself against others. Dignity is different. Dignity is wholeness within yourself. When you no longer need external validation to feel real. When your worth is no longer contingent on whether the people around you understand and agree with your choices. Something quiet and unshakable forms inside you. A foundation that no misreading, no judgment, no withdrawal of approval can reach. Marcus Aurelius observed that the consequences of anger are always heavier than whatever triggered it. The same truth holds for over-explanation. The consequences of a lifetime spent justifying, the eroded confidence, the scattered sense of self, the drained energy, the relationships shaped by performance instead of truth. Those consequences always outweigh the momentary discomfort of simply allowing someone to not fully understand you. The discomfort of leaving something unexplained lasts a moment. The cost of a lifetime of over-explaining lasts decades. There is a version of your life where you wake up already knowing you're enough, where your choices arise from peace rather than panic, where other people's opinions are useful information, but they are not the ground your life is built on. That version isn't located in a different job, a different city, a different set of circumstances. It becomes available in the next decision you make. The next moment you choose clarity over the performance of justification. It starts with one choice. My life is mine. No commentary required. Here are all 10. Our one final time. Lesson 1. You never signed the contract requiring approval. Your inner world is yours to govern. Protect it. Lesson 2. Over-explaining is a wound, not a personality trait. Understanding where it came from is how it actually changes. Lesson 3. The more you justify, the less you are believed. Economy of language is authority. Lesson 4. Relationships that demand constant explanation reveal a trust deficit. Know which ones ask that of you and why. Lesson 5. Silence is precision. The deliberate pause shifts every high-stakes conversation in your favor. Lesson 6. Stop defending. Absorb instead. Respond from groundedness, not from reflex. Lesson 7. The ACE framework. Assert first, minimal context. End the explanation. Lesson 8. There is a difference between explaining and communicating. One serves connection, the other serves fear. Lesson 9. Your identity is not available for public debate. Small, unexplained choices rebuild self-trust one at a time. Lesson 10. On the other side of this lies more creativity, deeper relationships, sharper decisions, and real dignity. It starts right now. If something in today's video landed, if even one thing shifted, tell me in the comments. Which lesson hit you hardest? Was it the wound in Lesson 2? The ACE framework? The identity piece in Lesson 9? Your answer tells me exactly what to create next, and it might be precisely what the next person watching needs to read. If this gave you something real, hit the like button right now. It tells YouTube that Stoic site content matters, and it carries this to more people who genuinely need it. Subscribe if you haven't already. Every week on this channel, we go this deep into Stoic philosophy, personal power, and the psychology of self-mastery. Now make one real decision, a true one, and don't explain it to anyone. See what that feels like. I'll see you in the next one. My life speaks for itself.